Number 9. Kenneth and Carrie Allen. When 29-year-old Kenneth Allen Jr. and his sister, 18-year-old Carrie, found themselves strapped for cash back in 2004, they brainstormed ways to come up with a quick payout. Instead of getting a job and working like a normal person would, they decided that the most logical way to get their hands on money was to kill their grandparents, since they believed they had a $200,000 inheritance. The twisted siblings visited their mother, Sharon Allen, at her Noblesville, Indiana home and tried to get her to go along with the idea. When she refused, they brutally stabbed her to death. Carrie and Kenneth then lured their grandmother, 75-year-old Betty Bradley, to their mother's apartment, where they suffocated her to death in a plastic bag. Next, the pair went to their grandparents' Indianapolis home, where Carrie acted as a lookout, while Kenneth fatally bludgeoned their own helpless grandfather, 91-year-old Leander Bradley, with a hammer. The demonic duo then buried their 3 victims in their grandparents' basement and poured fresh concrete over the bodies to conceal their dirty work. After this, they hit the road in a rental car and lived on the run with no clear plan in mind for their future. Weeks later, police pulled Kenneth and Carrie over for speeding near St. Louis, Missouri. The siblings were behaving suspiciously and gave inconsistent stories about where they were going and why. Inside the trunk, an officer found over $1,000 in cash, along with stolen jewelry, credit cards, and bloody sheets and pillows. The police contacted Indianapolis authorities, who later went to the Bradleys' home and found the freshly poured concrete. When confronted with the evidence, Carrie confessed. Kenneth also eventually admitted to the crimes after interrogation. Carrie received a 38-year prison sentence, and Kenneth is serving life plus 130 years without any possibility of parole. Number 8. Murderous Mother and Sons. One night in 2018, 20-year-old Emilio Valdez left his mother's home in Pontiac, Michigan, around 2 o'clock in the morning. Just moments after neighbors saw him getting into a car, they heard gunshots from inside the vehicle. The car then sped off, with Emilio still inside. Someone shot the young man in the head and chest and threw his body into the nearby Osmond Lake. He was still alive, though, when he entered the water. The next day, 2 fishermen found bloody clothing, an abandoned car, and a trail of blood leading to Emilio's now deceased remains. Just a few miles away in another lake, police found the vehicle Emilio's neighbors had reported seeing him leaving the house in. They found the victim's cell phone and a bullet casing inside. Detectives interviewed a teenage suspect named Angel Alvarez shortly after the brutal crime, but it wasn't until 4 years later that they found enough evidence to pin charges onto him. The 22-year-old was arrested on suspicion of murder earlier this year. His brother, 27-year-old Juan Diego Hernandez, and their mother, 46-year-old Guadalupe Davila Rodriguez, also face charges of accessory in connection to the murder. For now, the killer's motive remains unclear. According to the community and the police, Emilio was a polite, respectable, and well-liked young man whose only mistake was trusting in the wrong people. Number 7. The Cat Burglars. In 2011, Ronald Cat uprooted his life and moved from Portland to Houston. The 50-year-old widower brought his 2 kids along with him, 20-year-old Hayden and 18-year-old Abigail, whom he had raised on his own since his wife's passing several years earlier. From the outside, the Cats were a typical middle-class family, but for years, Ronald struggled to hold steady work as he battled with addiction to serve his grief. His need to pay bills and feed his habits led him to carry out bank robberies with his children's help. The trio pulled off at least one heist together in Portland before moving to Texas, where they robbed a credit union at gunpoint back in 2012. Ronald and Hayden entered the business wearing disguises and held the employees up with guns, while Abby waited nearby in the getaway car. Once their cash bag was filled, the men left, got into the car, and sped away. Detectives from the Fort Bend Sheriff's Office connected the cats to the robbery with surveillance footage of them buying their disguises in town. They believed that the family made off with nearly $100,000 total between all their robberies. Ronald was sentenced to 24 years in prison, while Hayden received a 10-year sentence. Abby was given 5 years, but was released early on for good behavior. She moved in with a generous Christian family who saw the family story on TV and wanted to help the young woman straighten out her life. But Abby eventually landed back behind bars for violating her parole duties. Her brother and father continue to serve out their sentences to this day. Number 6. The Morgans and Mother Dearest. A Chicago police officer named Ella French was shot dead during a late-night traffic stop in August 2021. The 29-year-old and her partner on duty pulled a car over for expired plates in the city's notorious West Englewood neighborhood when one of the vehicle's 3 occupants opened fire on them, fatally shooting her in the head and critically injuring her partner, who survived the attack. The suspected gunman, 21-year-old Emonte Morgan, was later shot by an officer and taken to the hospital. Authorities charged Morgan with 1 count of first-degree murder and 2 counts of attempted first-degree murder. His brother, 23-year-old Eric Morgan, was also arrested on weapons charges in connection to the crime. Just days after the horrific murder, the suspect's mother, Evelina Flores, kicked a public safety officer in the groin while trying to enter Emonte's hospital room. She continued to resist while demanding to visit her son, according to a local news station called Fox 32. Police charged Flores with a handful of misdemeanors, including battery, resisting a peace officer, and criminal trespass. Trial dates are still yet to be announced. Number 5. Robert and Michael Bever. During the night of July 22, 2015, police in Broken Arrow, Oklahoma received a 911 call from an 11-year-old boy claiming his brother was attacking the family. Officers were dispatched to the residence, where they found the front porch covered in blood. Inside, they found a teenage girl clinging to life with multiple stab wounds, so they rushed to the hospital. Authorities also found a toddler who was unharmed. Sadly, the boy who had placed the call for help died in the brutal attack, along with a 7-year-old girl, 5-year-old boy, and the siblings' parents, 52-year-old David Bever and his 44-year-old wife, April. All 5 victims had been viciously stabbed to death. One of the survivors identified her brothers, 18-year-old Robert Bever and 16-year-old Michael Bever, as the suspects. Police quickly apprehended the pair, who were hiding in the woods behind their house. An investigation revealed that the brothers had drawn up detailed plans to kill their family before carrying out the actual attack. They were each charged with 5 counts of first-degree murder, and a judge ruled that Michael, who was underage at the time, would be tried as if he were an adult due to the crime's severity. In the meantime, neighbors told the media that the Bevers mostly kept to themselves. The kids were homeschooled, and the family had so little contact with the community that some people didn't even know who they were until news of the stabbings went public. During the brothers' initial hearing, Robert said that he wanted to be remembered as a notorious serial killer. He said he and Michael had planned to continue their murder spree until they had killed at least 50 people. The pair craved fame and recognition, and apparently aimed to supersede infamous killers like the Columbine shooters and James Egan Holmes, who opened fire on a packed movie theater in 2012 Colorado. Luckily, they were caught before they could cause any more carnage. A judge sentenced Robert to life in prison without the possibility of parole, while Michael received a life sentence with possibility of parole after 38 years. The earliest Michael could see freedom again will be in 2056, when he's 57 years old. Number 4. Like mother, like daughter. Police in Odessa, Texas recently responded to a complaint about a fight involving 10 people, including an injured pregnant woman who asked the 911 caller to get an ambulance. When officers came to the scene, they found the expecting mother on her knees, crying and grabbing her stomach, alongside another victim who had 2 black eyes and a bloody mouth. First, police focused on getting help for the pregnant woman, then turned their attention toward the other victim, who said her former son-in-law's family had assaulted her over a child custody dispute. Several witnesses captured the fight on video, which showed 3 women repeatedly punching the victims and a man. The alleged attackers were identified as 44-year-old Bianca Renee Pineda, her 17-year-old daughter Janelle Pineda, and a 16-year-old whose name is being withheld from the media due to her being underage. Police caught up with the trio at a separate location and later took them into custody. The oldest, Pineda, faces 2 charges of engaging in organized criminal activity and 1 count of assault. She was released on a $45,000 bond. On the other hand, Janelle Pineda was charged with 2 counts of engaging in organized criminal activity and was released on a $34,000 bond. They'll now have to answer for their accused crimes in a court of law. Number 3. Ruthless Relatives. In late 2020, officers were called to a home in Phoenixville, Pennsylvania, owned by 73-year-old Ira Solomon. They found the elderly man dead on his kitchen floor with a shotgun wound in his head. It's hard to imagine what kind of monster would be capable of killing a senior citizen, and for a while, the case seemed like a real whodunit scenario. But detectives were determined to hold someone accountable for the horrific crime, so they spent hundreds of man-hours trying to get to the bottom of the case. Their hard work finally paid off recently when they arrested 3 suspects in connection to Solomon's murder. 46-year-old Rahim Pinder, his brother 44-year-old Dayan Pinder, and their cousin 49-year-old Nathaniel Pinder all face a long list of charges, including murder, robbery, burglary, conspiracy, and more. Investigators credited witnesses, acquaintances, home video recordings, and surveillance footage as reasonable cause for the arrests. Talk of a planned robbery among the suspects around the time of Solomon's murder points toward burglary as their main motive, but only limited details have been released to the public at this point. Number 2. Betsy and Jessica Robinson. When 44-year-old Elizabeth Romero's family members couldn't reach her earlier this year, they contacted the Waco, Texas Police Department to file a missing persons report. Days later, authorities received a tip that Romero was killed by 2 women, including one named Jessica Colleen Robinson. The informant claimed Romero's body had been dumped near a specific property, but a search with cadaver dogs failed to locate any human remains on the premises. In the meantime, police arrested 34-year-old Robinson on a separate theft charge. An arrest affidavit accused her and Romero of stealing hundreds of dollars worth of plywood from a home being built before Romero's disappearance. The property owner posted surveillance footage of the women committing the theft, and Romero was quick to send them a text message confessing to her role in the crime. Then she suddenly vanished. Following Jessica Robinson's arrest for theft, investigators interviewed her mother, Betsy Robinson, who admitted that her daughter had shot Romero dead and dumped her body off a bridge. Even though Romero's remains have yet to be found, prosecutors believed they had enough evidence to charge Jessica with murder. They also recently charged Betsy Robinson with murder in connection to the case, and a 42-year-old suspect named Cody Jean Ayers also faces a tampering charge. The investigation is ongoing, but police say they expect to make more arrests as they continue to piece together this bizarre and complicated case. Number 1. The Rodin Family Murders. Someone was determined to wipe out an entire family name one night in April 2016 when they traveled to 4 different homes in Pike County, Ohio, to murder 8 members of the Rodin family in cold blood while they were asleep. A relative found several of the victims the next day when she stopped by to feed some farm animals at one of their properties. All 8 victims were shot and killed, with 3 young children found at the crime scenes unharmed. One of the largest investigations ever undertaken by the Ohio Bureau of Criminal Identification and Investigation, BCI, ensued while detectives tried to put the pieces of the massacre together in hopes of finding a suspect. In the meantime, they feared that surviving members of the Rodin family might be targeted and warned the public that it was probably a good idea to stay indoors. In 2017, a SWAT team raided a home belonging to a local family named the Wagners in search of evidence connected to the case. They denied all involvement in the crimes. But authorities remained suspicious, and in late 2018, 4 members of the Wagner family, 47-year-old George Billy III, 48-year-old Angela, 27-year-old George, and 26-year-old Edward, were charged with the horrific murders. The suspects were accused of killing the Rodins to obtain custody of a daughter shared between members of the families. As part of a plea deal, Edward Wagner pleaded guilty to a slew of charges, including 8 counts of aggravated murder, conspiracy, aggravated burglary, and more. He admitted to killing 5 of the victims himself and received 8 life sentences, but managed to avoid the death penalty in exchange for his testimony against the other family members. All murder charges against Angela Wagner were dropped later on, but she pled guilty to other counts and will spend the next 30 years behind bars. The remaining 2 defendants, George and Billy, continue to maintain their innocence. Their cases are set for trial later this year or sometime next year. Thanks for watching. Would you rather find out your relative stole a car and got away with it, or have your parents' names in the headlines after they committed a robbery? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time. Bye.